Carlsbad was founded on the crest of the 1888 land boom, but by the turn of the century, only a few settlers remained. A national economic downturn forced many of the hopeful newcomers to abandon their Carlsbad holdings, and those that had no better place to go turned to dry farming or whatever services they could exchange with their neighbors. Except for the Victorian grandeur of town founder Gerhard Schuete's home and that of his carpenter, Alonzo Culver, most of the homes were of simple frame construction that could be, and were, easily moved from one site to another.
So Father and Mr. Newberry got pretty well acquainted, and Newberry told Father if he wanted to live to scratch a gray head, he said he should move to Carlsbad and drink that mineral water.
My name is Manuel Castorena, and my family and I first came to California in 1919 from New Mexico.
And we came here in May of 21. My father established an automobile repair shop right on the corner of Elm and State Street. Now, it was known as First Street at that time.
I decided I wanted to have my own business, and so I came. We had bought, when I was still up in Idaho, we had bought property in Carlsbad just for that very purpose. And with the big salary we made in those days, which was $150 a month, we saved our money very carefully, and we saved enough money, what we thought, to build a home and a store in Carlsbad. We have been engaged in the seed and farm supply business since 1933. Carlsbad at one time was very prominent in the growing of zucchini squash. There were hundreds of acres of zucchini squash here, and we grew zucchini squash. And my old thrashing machine's still sitting out there, surrounded by apartment houses and so on, rusting away, not accomplishing anything.
And my first impression of Carlsbad was there's all kinds of room to circulate.
A lot of things moved a lot slower too, in those days. And it's like, I know the first time we waited till the next day after the election to find out that Harding was elected. After all, Carlsbad, we didn't have anything here.
I can remember when Elm Street and Grand Street were avenues of the most magnificent eucalyptus that you ever saw. And a huge grevillea silk oak tree on each side of Grand between the railroad track and Carlsbad Boulevard.
I think there was about 25 people or 25 houses in Carlsbad. Maybe there wasn't that many people living in, but there were that many houses anyway.
Going up and down Elm, it was actually just a trail instead of a street. And that's the way it was a beautiful town at the time. It still is, believe me.
The San Diego Fruit and Produce Company used to grow peas. They grew hundreds of acres of peas in Carlsbad proper at that time. One of the early historical pictures that you see is huge acres of peas taken from Highland Drive westward toward down Tamarack Street.
There was an old long packing house where all the vegetables and peas and everything was grown around Carlsbad. That's why they packed them and shipped them.
Picking up on its agricultural legacy from Rancho Agua Hedionda, Carlsbad evolved into a farming community. Although some livestock continued to be raised, the main products were corn, beans, and squash. It wasn't until 1918, when water from the San Luis Rey River provided day and night irrigation, that flower fields and fruit orchards began to appear. Of these, the most significant was the avocado, a new exotic fruit that was just being introduced to the United States. Carlsbad growers promoted their delicious but hard-to-describe product by organizing an Avocado Day in Carlsbad that featured avocado sandwiches, avocado cake, an ice cream, and all the other avocado recipes that could be invented.
But if you look at a map of Carlsbad, you find that there's 25-foot wide lots by 125 deep all through the center section of Carlsbad.
It was a one-room school at that time, and I think the first year there was not over 12 kids in the whole school. That it took in the first to the 8th grade. So at that time, I believe that the youngsters got a better education because they listened to the older kids recite, and they studied their lessons, and it gave them a rounding education.
I can remember before I even went to school, I must have been about 5 years old, and I went up the stairs somehow, and the teacher took me up in the room, and I remember that it was a wood shop room, and I can remember what I remember mostly was they just was whittling and stuff, and they had shavings about they never swept out. They were just a foot high in the room. They used to have an old school up on top of the hill there. They call it the Calavera School. It's way up here on back of Carlsbad, way up in Pridner to Vista.
Carlsbad in the late 20s was still little more than a wide place in Highway 101, and the advent of piped water was the biggest news in town. Homes still clustered on the streets originally laid out by the town founders in 1888, but farmhouses gradually appeared on the outskirts. Downtown Carlsbad slowly reflected the development of a prospering agricultural community.
And they used to play ball right there it was right by McDonald's, right in that middle of that block. And I know later on they built, after they played there 3 or 4 years, then they built the show right there, and that was right in deep center field.
Carlsbad also became known as the place to go to for fun. Most camped on the beach bluffs or stayed in simple auto courts, but Seventh-day Adventists from Pasadena built their own campsite on the bluffs at the north end of Carlsbad, in the area now known as Granville Park. The idea of Carlsbad as a tourist destination caught on in a hurry, and one of its most ardent proponents was Eddie Kentner. He was proprietor of the Twin Inns, a restaurant that he had fashioned from the old Schutte Mansion in 1917. Here he and his wife Neva and their ever-growing family lived upstairs and served crispy fried chicken dinners to the increasing number of automobile tourists that passed his front door. He was the most genial of hosts and did everything he could to make sure that his success led to a lengthy series of additions and alterations to the old Schutte house, some more or less compatible with its original Victorian design, but always consistent with his own eclectic tastes and flair for excitement. Tossing Spanish grammar to the winds, the Los Diego Hotel was named for its midway location between Los Angeles and San Diego. The Red Apple Inn featured apple ornaments at every conceivable place. It is now the dining hall for the Army and Navy Academy. As folks put down the roots to stay in Carlsbad, the usual community institutions began to appear. The Carlsbad Union Church was built on Pine Avenue in 1926, the same year that St. Patrick's Catholic Church was built, just around the corner on Harding Street. This was also the year that Carlsbad's oldest continuing newspaper was established. 4 years later, the town's movers and shakers accomplished their priority goal of securing a major resort hotel for Carlsbad. Built by the Eastman Hotel Company of Los Angeles, it was heralded for the mineral baths that flowed from the same springs as those discovered in 1883 by John Fraser. The 30s brought other new enterprises to Carlsbad, and downtown blossomed to provide space for them all. The south end of State Street soon featured 2 new business blocks, the Ramsey and Killian buildings, plus a bank and a hardware store. When the Santa Fe Streamliner pulled into Carlsbad Depot in 1932, it surely seemed like the town itself had finally arrived. Spanish colonial emerged as the architectural trend of the times, with romantic casitas appearing all over town. Among the more notable households established in the 30s was that of A.J. Cohn, a retired Los Angeles groceryman whose palatial home is now Fidel's restaurant at the Carlsbad Inn. Some traditionalists clung to the Greek Revival designs of their possibly Midwest origins. The most celebrated arrival on the Carlsbad scene was actor Leo Carrillo, who purchased the old Kelly homestead south of Rancho Agua Hedionda and rebuilt it as the early California rancho of his dreams. His hacienda, barn, and the surrounding 10 acres are now owned by the city of Carlsbad and designated as a community park and cultural resource. Meanwhile, back in town, the houses were filling with children, and the old 2-story school that once nearly closed for lack of pupils had been replaced by a modern educational facility now bursting with pupils. Over in Granville Park, the old Red Apple Inn had become the dining room for a new private boys' school, the Army and Navy Academy. Its military emphasis fitted the times and the war that was soon to come. Carlsbad's first casualty of World War II was Maxton Brown Jr., who, with his father, had recorded the many birds who frequented the Buena Vista Lagoon. The war came even closer to home when Rancho Santa Margarita y Flores, just north of Oceanside, became a major Marine training base, Camp Joseph Pendleton in 1942. President Franklin Roosevelt was among the first of thousands of VIPs and ordinary GIs who visited Carlsbad at this time. World War II truly brought the world to Carlsbad's doorstep, and we were no longer on our own.